because I wasn't quite ready.
You are now live according to this screen.
Welcome, everyone. I'd like to begin by saying thank you for attending. We are here today to host an event to update you on the Klamath Dam removal project as the construction portion begins to wind down. We'll get into the details of what winding down really means shortly when our presenters present to you. My name is Wendy Ferris-George, and I am the Vice President of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. I was appointed in 2016 by the Karuk Tribal Council to represent them on the KRRC board. And I am very honored to say that I am very proud to represent my late father's tribe. My mother is an enrolled Hooper tribal member, and my late father, as I mentioned, was enrolled in the Karuk tribe. I am a credentialed master archaeologist and registered with the Secretary of Interior. I'd like to take just a moment to talk about what this event means to the river communities tonight. And I open up the Q&A for all participants to insert their questions so that at the end of the presentation, we will be able to answer some of those questions for you if time allows. For many years, this morning, I'll just say that we did a presentation, a webinar with the press. And I have to say, when we interview with the press, it's a little more stiff. And I'm hoping for this event tonight with our tribal communities, family and friends, that we can be a little more relaxed and talk about things from the heart, because that's how we best communicate. And so welcome again, everyone. And as you know, we have presenters tonight, such as Todd Soto, Mike Belchek, Ren Brunel, and Dave. Dave, I apologize. I always get your name. I want to say Belchek, but it's Chase. And he is with Rez. And so we have wonderful and amazing presenters who have expertise in this project and who have been managing the project with the KRRC board for throughout the duration of the project. So I'm very honored to have them here tonight presenting, and not only presenting for KRRC, but we are really one. We are really all a group of the river people because we all care and share the same stories and have made the same sacrifices throughout the last 25 years of trying to restore this river system. So, like I said, I'd like to take a little time just to reflect on that and what that means. And so many of us have endured so much pain and suffering throughout the last 25 years due to what these dams have caused. And I think the story of tonight sharing is providing an opportunity for you to see not only hope, but real hope, because these dams are now almost completely gone. And the stories these individuals will share with you will hopefully bring light and put a smile on your face and warmth in your heart as we present to you tonight. I will be emceeing along with Regina tonight. Like I said, if you have any questions, click on the bottom screen in the Q&A. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with our first presenter tonight. Our first presenter is going to be Ren. Ren is our public information officer for KRRC. And I had the privilege of being on the interview panel to hire her. And I could have asked for a better person to fit this position. She has done an amazing job for us. And I see her being involved in the tribal communities and the success of future projects long into the future. Go ahead, Ren.
Thanks, Poppy. I do my best to keep up. Like Poppy noted, I'm the Public Information Officer for the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. And we were created through the signing of the KHSA, so the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, which was the plan that got dam removal over the finish line, and it's where the river tribes, the states of California and Oregon, agencies, Pacific Corps came together to make a plan to see this through. So the plan was shared with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and in it would have been November of 2022, they approved our plan and said, okay, PacifiCorp can surrender the dams to the Renewal Corporation and you can get to work with deconstruction. And so by January 2023, we were on the ground on site getting to work. Can you see my slides well, Poppy?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
So I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with these dams, right? We have Copco number 1, which was the first dam constructed. Copco number 2 was constructed shortly thereafter, then J.C. Boyle and Iron Gate. It's important to note that all these dams were held by a private corporation and existed for the sole purpose of generating hydroelectric power. So they didn't provide any sort of meaningful flood control, and they didn't provide irrigation or anything like that. These are where the dams are located in the basin, and you can really see the way they cut the basin into the upper basin and the lower basin. And you can see the big impact, one of the big impacts these dams had was blocking fish passage, which they've been doing since around 1913, which is when they were reaching a point with the construction of Copco number 1 that impeded fish passage. So it's been over 100 years since fish have had spawning access to about 400 miles of historic habitat. So, like I said, we were able to get on ground in January 2023. A lot of the work was just building capacity out on site. It's in a pretty rural area. We had to build roads down to some of these dams, set up offices, things like that. But the big thing that we did in 2023 was begin the deconstruction. Well, not just begin and complete the deconstruction of Copco number 2, which was the smallest dam on site. And the reason we took this one out first is because way smaller than the other dams. It only stood about 33 feet tall compared to Iron Gate's 180. And then it was a diversion dam. So it didn't have a big water or a big reservoir behind it holding back water. Instead, it diverted the flows out of this really beautiful canyon up on site. And with the lack of reservoir, and it was positioned right below Copco number 1. So it would have been in the way of the drawdown process, which I'll touch on here shortly. And so for all those reasons, this dam came out and we completed this in about October of last year. So I'm sure lots of folks have seen images of the Iron Gate and Copco reservoirs. And actually, if you go look on Google Earth or Google Maps right now, you can still see how electric green they used to be. But this is Jenny Creek, which is a corner of the Iron Gate Reservoir where this tributary on the right-hand side, Jenny Creek, comes in. And this was this was probably about October of last year. And then what we were going to see right after this is after we initiated drawdown, which refers to the slow draining of the waters that were held back by the dams. A lot of people were really disappointed that we didn't do one big explosion and a rush of water to remove the dams, which is a good strategy for sediment evacuation and other dam removal projects. But for this project, we're about 200 miles upstream. So we knew we then needed to drain these waters in a very slow and controlled manner so that we weren't going to do any sort of flooding impacts or things like that. And so that was one big concern. The other big concern is that these dams in place for over 100 years have been accumulating sediments. Most of the sediment, 90% of it, is dead algae. You can see what these blooms look like. They do a big algae bloom, it die in the fall, and it sink to the bottom. And so there was about 15 million cubic yards of accumulated sediments. Like I said, 90% of it being dead algae that were held back by the reservoir. And then the rest of the sediments were sands and gravels that would be coming down tributaries such as Jenny Creek that you see here that would hit the flat water of the reservoir and stop in its tracks, where historically that sand and gravel would have gone on downstream. But so this is pre-drawdown. We initiated in January. Iron Gate was done in about mid-February. And this is what it looked like afterwards. And in this image, you can really see those really dark sediments. That dark is the kind of darker sediments in this upper left-hand corner is all that dead plant matter I'm talking about. That's the dead algae. And then the lighter sediments that you see are those deposited sands and gravels that were coming down from Jenny Creek. This is one of my favorite images. This is the Copco Reservoir after it was fully drained. You can see that it has a beautiful winding path. I think for a lot of our rivers in Northern California, for the Klamath River and its tributaries. In the 1950s, the Army Corps of Engineers came in and straightened out rivers where they wound through valleys like this for agriculture. But since this river was hidden under a reservoir during that time, it was spared that fate. So it has a really beautiful winding path through this valley. So this is what the backside of Copco number 1 looked like after we had fully drained it. I think most folks haven't seen this backside of the dam. And we were able to get to work on the removal of Copco number 1 ahead of the other dams because it's a concrete dam. For the other two dams, Iron Gate and J.C. Boyle, they're called clay core earthen dams, which means they're just a big pile of dirt and rocks. And those kind of dams can never be overtopped, because if they do get overtopped, the water just erodes them and it causes what's called catastrophic failure. So we didn't want to have a situation where the dam was halfway deconstructed. We had a big spring flow event that could potentially overtop it and cause failure. So we had to wait until spring flows had subsided to begin the deconstruction on those dams. But with the case of Copco number 1, since it's all concrete, we could have had it halfway deconstructed, had a big flow event, and it would have stayed securely in place. So we started deconstruction on this dam back in March. And the way it's taken apart is through a repetitive process of they drill a series of holes through the top of the dam. They pack those holes with explosives, blast, excavate that material to put away at the fractures, and then repeat the process. And there was a total of 14 blasts conducted on this dam. And this is what it is looking like now, which is really exciting to see. So now you can also see that the river is going through the diversion tunnel. So you see how the river disappears on the left-hand side and then pops out on the upper right-hand side. That diversion tunnel is original to the dam's construction. It's where they routed the river when they were building the dam. And that's what we've been utilizing to funnel the river around our construction site. And while you can see here that the dam is essentially gone, there is still work to do, because this dam went pretty far underground as well. So we do still need to excavate about 20 feet down below the river's surface. And that's because you don't want a funny hard point in the river canyon. This whole canyon's full, it's made out of basalt and cinders, really loose material. And if the water were to hit a sudden hard spot, that could create strange hydraulic effects. And so that's why we're going underground, and then we'll backfill it with area rock, grade the river channel, and then when that's all done, break the coffer dam. Now, coffer dams refer to this kind of over here. I'm not sure if you guys can see my mouse, but there's a little dam here that's funneling the waters into that diversion tunnel. And so after the river is all prepared, we will break that little dam, and that's when we'll restore the historic flows to the correct path. So this is Iron Gate. We finally were able to begin deconstruction on Iron Gate on May 1st. You can see here in this image that originally they were placing the material into the spillway. So you can see that spillway on the right-hand side is where, like I noted, these dams didn't really provide flood control. So when it rained and there was not enough space in the reservoir to hold all that water, the water would simply go down the spillway. But you can see the way it's blasted into that cliff edge. All the material to construct the dam was harvested on site. And so we're just returning it to the places where it came from. One of those areas is this spillway. And for this dam, not a lot of concrete involved, so no explosions. This is simply just scooping up that material, loading it in trucks, and taking it to the disposal sites. The other disposal site is on this right-hand side. You can kind of see between these two hills, and then there's a road. The road kind of used to go between the saddle between two slopes, and they deconstructed one of these slopes to build Iron Gate in the first place. So after we filled in the spillway, now we've been taking these materials over to that slope area and reconstructing it. So I just want to give everybody a reminder of what this dam used to look like. I also want to draw your attention to this little gatehouse, this cream-colored building on the left-hand side. You can see the spillway is there, the old fish hatchery down below, and the powerhouse. And this is what the dam was looking like towards the end of last week. So you can see that crews have made significant progress. You can see that that tower is still remaining, and that's because that tower holds up the gate for the diversion tunnel at this dam. So at this one, you can see it kind of right in the center of the screen. There's a small hole where the river's coming out. That's the diversion tunnel we're using in this case to route it around our construction site. And so that gate tower needs to stay there, holding up that gate until, similarly, this dam is gone. We break the little coffer dam and we have a free-flowing river condition. Then we'll get to work on removing that gate tower. And I just wanted to share another perspective. This is down on the ground, so you can really see how much of this dam is gone at this point. And then my friend Olivia, who works at RES, shared this image with me the other day. And this is looking from the backside of the dam downriver. And this is an exciting shot because you can actually start to see the river down below that was hiding on the other side of the dam. This is the J.C. Boyle Dam site up in Oregon. So similarly, it was an earthen dam, mostly earthen dam with a concrete spillway. And so where you can see the river going now is through that spillway area. And when that reservoir got too full, that's where the river, or where the reservoir would dump its water. But that's not the historic path of the river. The historic path of the river actually went through this earthen portion of the dam and round around it. Here's another view of that. So you can see that crews started taking apart that earthen portion to reveal the historic path of the river. And this is where crews were at towards the end of last week. And they're getting very, very close. And this dam's kind of exciting because once we remove all this earthen portion, and you can see this little stripe back here, that's this dam's coffer dam that's currently funneling the waters through the base of the spillway. We'll break that little coffer dam and instantly have the river back where it used to be. Then crews will switch over and begin to deconstruct that concrete portion. But at that point, we'll already have volitional fish passage, which is very exciting. So that's where all of the deconstruction of the dams stand. But I also am happy to share that this area that you're looking at right now is the area of Kikacheki over the village side of Kakashkosh, which was a Shasta Indian village, a Shasta Indian Nation village. And at the beginning of June, we had the governor come out and meet with the Shasta Indian Nation out there and share the news that some of the lands after the deconstruction is complete and the restoration is complete, we will return these lands to the Shasta Indian Nation. And that's a part of the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement. When Pacificorp surrendered the project to us to oversee the deconstruction, the Renewal Corporation currently holds these lands, but when we're done with everything, we will return them either to the respective states they're in, so the states of California or Oregon, or the state's third-party designee. And so the state of California has elected that one of those designees is the Shasta Indian Nation, and they will be receiving 2,800 acres of historic homelands, which is amazing. And then just to wrap up, I wanted to kind of put all the dam construction on a timeline so that you guys can see it, and hopefully it makes a little more sense in this laid out this way. So you can see that was the drawdown period. We were able to get to work on COPCO #1 there in March, a little bit of a waiting game to get working on J.C. Boyle and Iron Gate. And now you can see that we're really getting close to breaking those coffer dams and restoring volitional fish passage for J.C. Boyle and COPCO #1, right? So you'll see that happen probably right at the beginning of August for both of those dams. Iron Gate, much bigger dam, a lot more material to move. And so we're looking at towards the end of August. And folks may have heard that we're ahead of schedule, which is true. So our deadline to achieve volitional fish passage, which just means that fish can make it up the river of their own accord, that is October 15 was when we needed to have volitional fish passage. But if we stay on track at our current rate, it looks like we could have that as soon as the end of August, which is very exciting. And so I will leave it there. Let me stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pass it over to Jan Chase, who works for Resource Environmental Solutions, which is our restoration contractor, and he can offer a summary of the restoration activities that have been going on up on site.
Yeah, thank you, Ren, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to talk with you. My name is Dan Chase. I'm the Director of Fisheries, Aquatics and Design for Resource Environmental Solutions, or RES. And as Red mentioned, we are the restoration contractor for this project. I did want to note we are not the company that's taking out the dams. That's Kiewit. Kiewit is the civil engineer that's removing the physical structures. We do restoration. And so what we are responsible for is the former reservoir footprints and revegetating those and restoring those areas. And we're really excited to report that we feel really confident and are really excited about where the restoration is at this early stage. And so I'll have a few photos I'm going to share with you shortly to show some of those images of what the restoration has been looking like. But just to start, as Red mentioned, the timeline, in January, the draining of the reservoir started, and that really exposed about 2,200 acres of bare land. And so if that remained untouched, then it would be taken over very quickly, we would anticipate, by non-native invasive plant species such as star thistle, cheatgrass, and medusa head, all of which is pretty detrimental to recovering native wildlife here. So we started off by contracting with the Yurok tribe to implement a really ambitious revegetation plan, and their crews really went to work right away. So I'm going to share a few photos here. One day after the reservoirs began draining, crews were on site and they were already starting to broadcast native seeds out onto land that had been submerged for decades. And so to do this effort, we weren't able just to go down to a local hardware or garden store and pick up the seeds that we needed. We needed over 17 billion seeds that are native to Northern California and Southern Oregon for this effort. So back in 2019, our pre-drawdown activities included focusing on seed gathering and propagation, and to make sure that we had the billions of seeds that would be needed, for thousands of plants and bare root trees to revegetate those reservoir footprints when the drawdown was completed. So we had commercial nurseries that were also used to grow genetically adapted plants to the local environment. And we knew that those plants were right because they had been painstakingly harvested by the tribal crews from the project area. So to begin, this really first initial planting effort that occurred over the spring included over 66,000 pounds of native plant seeds, 78,000 trees and shrubs, and over 27,000 acorns that were used for this initial seeding effort. And so when we started, let me continue here. Several of the locations were going to be actually too muddy for the crews to be able to access. And so we had to also supplement their work with helicopters. And you can see a couple photos here on the right-hand side. So we had a combination of field crews out there distributing seeds and helicopters that were used to cover the 2,200 acres. Now, it also remained fairly muddy when we first started off. And when the reservoirs drained, it looked a little daunting at first, you could imagine. But we did have a lot of confidence in the approach. And so what I'm going to show you is what some of these photos of some of our restoration areas are looking like with this landscape scale change being implemented. This first photo is taken in January, right before the reservoir drawdown, and it's at the upper end of Iron Gate Reservoir. And we can see here that same location taken just a couple weeks later after the drawdown was completed, and the exposed mud flats and the re-emerged Klamath River in the upper portion of Iron Gate Reservoir. And now if we fast forward to May, what we can see is that a lot of that benefit of that distribution of native seeds out onto the landscape. We can see the blooms occurring of California poppy, fiddleneck, and lupin in the background, and then also a lot of vegetative coverage in the foreground. Now I'm going to continue to another location in Iron Gate, and this is Jenny Creek confluence with the Klamath River, and this is March of 2024. This is shortly after the distribution of seeds would have occurred out on the landscape. So we're not seeing them germinated yet, but they had been distributed out on the site. And so if we jump forward to June, we can see a lot of the greening and the sprouting and germination that occurred and some of that initial revegetation effort taking off. Now, I'm going to move upriver to the Copco Lake footprint. And here we're looking downstream on Beaver Creek in the Beaver Creek corridor. And this was February, a few weeks after the draining of the reservoir. And what we can see is a very vast mud flat out there without any actual vegetation on it. If we jump forward to May, this is taken from the same location. And you can see a lot of the benefit of that hard work of distributing seed across the landscape with the foreground showing California poppies and fiddlenecks as well that were in bloom at the time. Now continuing on upstream, our most upstream site that we're working in that has a reservoir footprint to be revegetated is in J.C. Boyle in Oregon. And so this photo is taken looking upstream at the newly emerged Klamath River within J.C. Boyle footprint. And this was in February. And then we can see another photo from that same location with the revegetation taken off there in June of this year. So we know that we're in summer and that the heat is upon us and that's causing a lot of the real bright vegetation, the greens that we saw in the landscape to start to die and turn brown. That's a natural part of this process, and a lot of that vegetation, the native vegetation, will go to seed, which will help the revegetation effort going forward. But we're also going to have crews that are going to go back out there when the planting window reopens in the fall, and we'll start to revegetate again in different areas that need help and need additional coverage. So we do feel that we are well on our trajectory here to help with reestablishing vegetation in those areas, and that we know that this is going to be a long-term process. And it's important to note that we are responsible for the success of that revegetation, but that RES does not unilaterally decide when the project is successfully completed. We coordinated closely with regulatory agencies to develop the project's long-term restoration goals. And then we'll stay until the job is done. And that's going to take several years for us to achieve and to make sure that the restoration is on a positive trajectory. We do know that our work is really critical to the recovery of salmon and steelhead and other native fishes in this portion of the basin. And so now, in addition to the replanting that we're responsible for, we also have responsibilities to make sure that the tributaries are connected to the main stem river within these former reservoir footprints. And we're monitoring water quality and protected species. And that has at times included the requirement for us to move species out of harm's way. I'll show you a couple examples of that. First, in the spring, we were required to relocate imperiled species of suckers from the project area reservoirs prior to the draining of those bodies of water. We were also tasked with moving juvenile salmon out of the main stem Klamath River before the expected sediment-laden water was released from the reservoirs in the winter. And then over the past year and a half, we've had crews out on the ground monitoring and relocating western pond turtle to make sure, and other sensitive species, to help them when they're in areas where construction activities could be potentially harmful to them. So one of the highlights I can say from this project has been the ability to work hand in hand with the tribes to implement the restoration work and our other fisheries and water quality monitoring requirements. Our tribal friends are highly motivated to put their heart and soul into healing a river that they've relied on since time immemorial, and they've been incredibly generous in sharing their place-based knowledge with our entire team. So we feel truly honored to play such a key role in the largest salmon recovery effort in the world. I'll just give you a little update on some of our upcoming restoration work here. We will have helicopter placement of large wood taking place in the tributaries this August. So these are large mature trees that were harvested with their root wads still attached, and they will provide immediate large-scale habitat restoration and enhancement in those tributaries. We're also going to have revegetation efforts that will restart again in the fall when the planting window reopens and temperatures start to drop for us out there. We have ongoing aerial and ground-based data collection and restoration design progression that's occurring through the end of this year. That's being done through a combination of UAV and drones, along with fixed-wing aircraft, and then on-the-ground crews surveying to make sure we have the data we need to progress the restoration. All of that is gearing towards additional tributary restoration that will occur next summer. We also have fish passage monitoring and maintenance activities that are taking place across 49 miles of main stem river and tributary habitat. And then we have ongoing water quality monitoring that's taking place across about 240 miles of the main stem river. So with that, I'll say thank you all for your time and for listening. I wanted to pass on that for folks that are interested in tracking and following some of the restoration updates, that I direct you to the link in the QR code here on the bottom right part of the screen. And you'll be able to follow a story and map that has been prepared to help communicate some of the transition and changes that are taking place with the landscape scale restoration and habitat uplift. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Belchick. I'm a senior water policy analyst for the Yurok tribe. I've been working for the tribe for 29 years and working on dam removal for the last 24 years when it began in the year 2000. I wanted to talk today about the context of dam removal and how it fits into a larger restoration picture. Dam removal is right now the largest fish restoration project in the world, in the history of the world. But it's only a part of a bigger mission that we have. The tribe that I work for, the Yurok tribe, has 6,800 members. Their ancestral homelands are on the lower 45 miles of the Klamath and 90 miles of the coast. And they depend quite simply on salmon and on the health of the river. So when the fisheries program was established and the first people in the program were hired, including myself and many others, including Walk Troy Fletcher, our mission was really simple. It was to fix the Klamath River. The entire Klamath River, 14,000 square miles incredibly biodiverse, and bring it back as much as we could to functioning. I know early on we decided that we needed to think big because the problems that the Klamath were having were really big. And when the dam removal, or when the relicensing started on the dam removal, on the relicensing process, we began immediately to focus on dam removal. And the more we learned about the dams, the more problems we uncovered. Toxic algae, temperature problems, lack of sediment. We eventually discovered that the sea Shasta disease problem we were having on the Klamath was closely tied to the dams, and also just the separation of the Klamath into the two parts, the upper and lower basin, when they used to be unified. And it went beyond just ecological, it was cultural. The upper and lower basin at the time existed in different worlds. And so one of the objectives of dam removal here is to unify the basin. It's really important to understand that dam removal itself won't fix the entire Klamath Basin. And so we are embarked on other large-scale projects, big projects that you could see from space. For example, this fall, Agency Barnes Ranch will be reconnected to Upper Klamath Lake. That's 12,000 acres of additional wetlands that will benefit suckers in the Cuptu and the Chwam. It will help with salmon habitat when they return to that area, waterfowl, and also water quality and basic ecosystem and hydrologic function. But we're not going to stop there. We're partnering with the Klamath tribes and gearing up to do work on the upper Klamath, the tributaries, the Williamson, the Sprague, the Wood, and start fixing those, as well as not forgetting about the tributaries in the lower Klamath, the Shasta and the Scott, and ensuring that they have habitat, but also flows necessary to support that habitat. And let's not forget the Trinity also. So the breadth of this project is breathtaking. It's big. Dam removal is really big itself, but it's just part of a much bigger effort. We're also talking with several farm districts and reclamation and Ducks Unlimited to reconnect Lower Klamath with the Klamath River itself, which will also provide habitat for salmon, ducks, suckers, and also have water quality benefits. So, and we're also partnering with the Karuk tribe and NOAA Fisheries and other partners to implement almost $20 million worth of restoration projects and our partners in the areas above the dams, in the Shovel, Spencer, Janny Creek areas. And so there's a lot to do, and it's really important to understand that this doesn't just benefit fish. We're looking to integrate terrestrial ecosystems, but also people, to bring people back into the landscape and bring back the stewardship ethic and have people, including tribal members, involved in restoring the Klamath. We believe it changes the trajectory of people's lives, not just the Klamath, not just the ecosystem itself. And I will just stop right there. And if there are any questions, I'm also prepared to talk about water quality, but we'll handle that in the question and answer if necessary. And I'll turn it over to Taz Soto now.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, my name's Taz Soto. I'm the Fisheries Program Manager for the Karuk Tribe. And, like Mike and many of the other folks here have been working on this for well over 20 years. And, it's a really big deal. So the Karuk Tribe is located basically a little ways above the Trinity, through the Mid Klamath, up to near Iron Gate Dam. So that's the ancestral territory of the Karuk Tribe and where we do most of our work today. We operate a bunch of juvenile outmigrant traps, so we're tracking juvenile health and fish health. And one of the big concerns with dam removal is the impact of water quality on fish. So we've been monitoring fish out migration for the last, through the whole out migration, which usually starts sometime around March and typically ends when water temperatures in the Klamath become more or less lethal to salmonids, and fish are forced to stop migrating and move into thermal refugia. But most of the fish that out migrant they're gone by now. We usually pull our out migrant traps usually sometime in mid June. Sometimes a little earlier if temperatures heat up faster, or sometimes a little later if we have a wetter year or cooler temperatures. Um, so this year we ended up stopping our monitoring there, and fish migration really just kind of came to a halt when water temperatures kind of exceeded the threshold of salmon sometime in the last part of June, early July, when this heat wave started. So, for those of you who don't know the Klamath is a warm water system throughout the summer. So the adults will come in the fall, or actually late summer, when days become shorter, nights are longer, river starts to cool off, the sun's lower in the horizon, and the adult fish will come in. So right now, there's not a lot going on as far as salmonids in the river, other than in these refuges located at creek mouths. So this year, I would say would categorize it as normal, um, even with the drawdown. We did see an uptick in parasite levels in sea shasta back in April and the first part of May, and then that really dropped off. But when that was happening and the fish were being exposed, water temperatures were pretty cool. So we didn't really see a lot of infection of disease and things like that. Where on some years we have pretty high levels of at least clinical signs, and we see a lot of mortality. So this year, even with drawdown, conditions weren't too bad. I would say that I would characterize it as normal to actually, probably on par with a better year than a lot of the years we've had here on the Klamath as far as fish health. We also have a network of real-time water quality monitoring stations that folks can log on to karuk.us water quality, search that, and then an interactive map will come up if you search real-time water quality, and you'll see a network of sites, and you can click on those sites. They're located in places like Orleans, Syad, below Iron Gate, above Iron Gate, above Copco. There's some in the tributaries, the Scott, the Shasta, the Salmon. In each one of those sites, you can access basically real-time water quality data, which includes temperature, turbidity. Those are the things that are probably I mostly look at, I would say, turbidity and temperature. Also look at dissolved oxygen. If you do see a spike in turbidity, sometimes you can see a sag in dissolved oxygen. But things have actually been pretty good over the last few months, and fish have been responding in a positive way. So I don't have any. I mean, I'm so used to reporting bad news about fish health on the Klamath that it's a little odd. But yeah, things have been looking really good. We will be monitoring fall run, the adult run coming in. We're planning on putting in a fish counting station using sonar. We're also planning to do a bunch of radio telemetry to tell us where these fish go, what their kind of spatial distribution is after the dam removal, and so we're going to be putting radio tags and using sonar to count fish at a site actually located on the res property just downstream of Iron Gate. So, and then we're going to follow that up with actual red surveys, counting spawning beds and counting carcasses and so forth in the during the spawning period. So we're in the process of setting up the post dam removal salmon monitoring, which is really exciting. And yeah, so we're kind of in that stage right now. But I would just categorize things as a normal year, even with the drawdown and the water quality impacts that we saw earlier in the drawdown. So anyway, yeah, that's all I have. So thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, everyone. You all did an amazing job at sharing your knowledge. I believe we are going to go into the Q&A and answer some of the questions that are currently listed by the attendees. I will start with the first question, and Ren, I'm going to throw this question your way. The question is there a map of which lands will be returned to the tribes?
I would leave it up to the Shasta Indian Nation to share a map of the lands that are being returned, but I can tell you that the general reach is an area that is traditionally called Kikacheki. So in that image that I was sharing that had the old powerhouse in it, looking up that beautiful canyon, that is a portion of that that's actually overlooking the village site of Kakashkosh. So it's up through that reach, through that beautiful canyon, and then up and out into the Kopko Reservoir is the general area that they'll be receiving.
Thank you, Ren. Regina?
Great. Yes, I'm going to help with the question and answers. My name is Regina Chicazola. I'm with Save California Salmon. And the next question we have, I think, would probably be a question for Dan. The organic sediments in the reservoir pools apparently give you an initial exposed surface quite different from the mineral soils or lower organic content of the never submerged soils. How does that contrast affect your revegetation decisions?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Regina. So yeah, I think what this is getting at is we have the residual reservoir sediments, a lot of which is from organic material like the cyanobacteria-driven algae that has dropped down over the decades and kind of set up layers on the bottom of the reservoir. There's also a lot of silts and fines that have come down as well. And so that's sort of what's mixed in. And that's not what's the normal soil structure that you would see in these locations without the dams in place. And so during the drawdown, quite a bit of that material did mobilize and evacuate out of the reservoir footprints. We were also able to actually do some really active sediment evacuation in a couple locations that were doing our tributary restoration work to help facilitate that material moving out a little bit quicker during that drawdown period as well, which helps. But then quite a bit of it still remained. And then our objective with the vegetation is to help stabilize those sediments so that way they remain and don't continue to kind of leach or bleed into the river. You can kind of think about how burn scars on the landscape can dump in a lot of sediment when there's rain events. And so that's what we want to try to avoid, is that repeated sort of mass movement of sediments into the reservoir, into the former reservoir footprints as a result of this project. So really our seed mixes, to get back to your question, our seed mixes were designed to have native plant species that we thought would do well with germination and establishment with that initial seeding effort. We had about 6 different seed mixes that we were using across the project area. You know, once again, this is several different reservoirs across a really long linear distance, over 40 plus miles of river length. And so we have different elevations that some of our footprints are at. And so we had different seed mixes that were tailored to those different zones. And they had anywhere from, I think it was about 11 to 20 native plant species that were typically in those. And so those were all geared to ones that we thought would establish here early and quickly, and then give us the chance to have, when they would die back in the summertime, go to seed and help with some of the stabilization. Now, I will say this is only the first effort when it comes to revegetation. We have more work that we're going to do here in the fall. again, as another effort to really blanket the area with native seeds and container plants and different size plants to really start to kickstart the vegetation coverage. And for those plants, I will say that we have about 98 to 100 species that are part of what we have been able to grow out using nurseries in the area. And so those include not only seeds, but bare roots and container plants, a mix of perennials and annuals, and also trees that will be going in and being planted in the area. So it's a really ambitious and aggressive effort to get vegetation out there quickly and to help use that material to help with the soil building process as well. Thanks, Regina.
Thank you, Dan. Ren, there's a follow-up question regarding the Shasta. Will the Shasta tribe be able to be involved in restoration planning for the 2,000 plus acres that will be returned to the tribe?
Yeah, Res has done a good job of engaging with the Shasta Indian Nation on just that. First of all, with the navigating, important cultural resources that are out there on site as they move through the restoration of the project. And then even more recently, they've been engaging with them on the next round of seed collection, because while Dan noted that the Yurok have been out there collecting seeds for many years now, and those were taken to native plant nurseries, and they collected 98 plants of different native species at first, but the more diversity, the better. And so currently they're working with the Shasta Indian Nation to identify what kind of other culturally significant plants or what plants that are important to their food sovereignty program that they're getting going, what they like to see out in the reservoir footprint. So they are engaging with, there's a good collaboration between Res and Shasta Indian Nation on just that.
Thank you, Ren. Regina?
Yeah, I can ask the next question. I think this is probably a question for Taz or Mike, because it's related to fisheries. There's a couple fisheries questions, so maybe I'll ask two in a row. The first one is, can someone discuss the new hatchery that is in place, how long it'll be running, and when it is expected to be closed so the salmon will be eventually from all in-river spawning?
Toss, you want to handle that, or you want me to start, then you fill in?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, start.
Okay. So the original agreement called for continuing Iron Gate, finding a new alternate water source, continuing Iron Gate for 8 years, funding from Pacificor. Ultimately, an alternate water source was not able to be located for Iron Gate, and Plan B was to build a new hatchery, which Pacificor funded. Pacificor will fund this hatchery for 8 years, and it has about half the hatchery production that the old hatchery did. So it's already reduced. Right now, there's no concrete plans for the future after the 8 years. I think our assumption is that it'll be mothballed when at 8 years, or when the natural runs are able to implement themselves or be self-sustaining, in other words. I think, the other important thing to do is to talk about the restoration plans or the reintroduction plans for fish above Iron Gate. And that is generally, with the exception of spring chinook, it calls for passive reintroduction, just letting the fish do it themselves. The exception would be spring chinook, which the Klamath Tribes and ODFW are investigating a conservation hatchery, which is different than a production hatchery in the upper Klamath Basin Reach right now. Those are still in the study phase right now. Although they have been releasing about 10,000 young fish per year with radio tags just to see how they would do up there. So we may get returns from some of those sooner than later. Taz, help me fill in on any of the stuff that I might have missed on that.
Yeah, appreciate that, Mike. I mean, our goal is to not have a hatchery. I mean, the hatcheries were built to mitigate losses of habitat behind the dams, and now that that's no longer going to be a problem, we don't really have a need for a hatchery. I understand that there will be a conservation hatchery for spring chinook, and that's really we don't have a lot of spring Chinook left in the Klamath Basin. The Salmon River has the last wild population in the Trinity, and that population is literally less than 100 fish right now in the Salmon River. So, we really desperately need new populations of fish, spring Chinook specifically in the upper Klamath. There's a lot of cold water up there, and I think once we get spring Chinook established, those are blue ribbon trout streams right now. So I am pretty confident that spring Chinook are going to do well in the upper basin. It's just a matter of getting them established. So there will be a hatchery for that. And but with that said, it's harder to get, it's not easy to get rid of hatcheries either. So anyway, so I hope that answers your question.
Awesome. So there is a couple of fisheries questions on Facebook. So maybe I'll ask one and then I'll pass back on to Poppy to ask more of the questions that are not necessarily only for fisheries. So we have two questions that are highly related on Facebook. One is spawning gravel recruitment being monitored, and what kind of changes in aquatic plant growth are you seeing? Is there scouring happening yet?
So Utah's.
The river is occupying its historic channel in the reservoir footprint, and you can see spawning gravels available. I don't know about gravel recruitment. That system up there rarely moves gravel, and we really need a big flood to actually move gravel. But the existing gravel in the channel is there, and just looking at the river and the Iron Gate footprint and the Copco footprint, there's pools, there's tailouts, there's all the characteristics of a river. I mean, the river channel's there. There's the old oak trees that are there along the riparian area is still there. They're all dead, but all the structure of the river to provide spawning habitats already in place. So I think it's just waiting for salmon to use it.
And I think, just to add to that, Jack Trout had a question that's really closely related to that, about where are fish and when can we expect the river to clear up. Generally, these things work on like what you might call an exponential decay, like where a lot of sediment moves early and then it tapers off. So I think there's a lot of fines still transporting a lot of sediment. I saw there's 100 milligrams per liter, which translates in suspended sediment, which is still translating to something like 400 tons a day. It's still coming out of the system. It's going to take a little while to clear out. We're at the beginning stages of the recovery arc of the river. I think it's going to be touchy to precipitation and flow changes for a little while, like maybe a couple years. But rivers are resilient. They return really fast. We saw that. You could take examples like from St. Helens and the Toutle River, which had like a 40-foot wall of hot mud come down it, and steelhead runs back in force less than 10 years later. So, the rivers can be a little touchy for a while. It's recovering. As to are there fish right now, Jack? If you're talking about juveniles, yeah, there's plenty of fish up there right now. Channy Creek had a resident population that I assume's migrated down into there. The Karuk tribe, Yurok tribe have been doing seining and in river trapping, and there are fish in there right now. If you're talking about adults, the fall run, it's a bit early for the fall run right now. It's really important to understand that because the dams elevated the fall temperature, the fall run is now moved back about 3 or 4 weeks from what it used to be historically. So, the door's open for that run to come in earlier. It's going to be interesting to see how soon the fish come through that open door right now. Typically, our spawning surveys have started second week of October in that region. We can already see right now that the upper river around Iron Gate is cooling down faster than the river down by Syad and further downriver. And what I expect to see is that as we get towards fall and the days start shortening, we're gonna really see that trend intensify. Already Iron Gate is cooler than Syed, it's cooler than Keno. And the nightly lows are very low. I expect that's from the springs. So Jack, I don't know exactly when these fish are gonna come in. The door's open for them to come in pretty early, but the genetics might take a little while to re-express themselves.
Can I jump in on the rest
Sure.
of Jack's question there? So he also asked, when do you think will the river, oh, you answered the turbidity question, and then is the public allowed to float the Klamath and in what sections? So I would keep currently your floats down below Iron Gate, and this is for a couple reasons. So, well, we don't, first and foremost is like getting in to access the Copco and Iron Gate reservoirs will require you to walk through these newly submerged lands. And while at the end of this project, one of the main goals is for public access and recreation. Right now, we want people to keep people off these lands for a couple of reasons. The first one is safety. And then the second one is to not track in invasive vegetation as all this native vegetation is getting going. And then the other part is that in my presentation, I showed that there's these diversion tunnels that go around the construction sites at this time, and it would be incredibly dangerous to get anywhere near those diversion tunnels, right? Like, this is water that goes underground. It's very rocky in there. I'm not sure that you would make it out on the other side. And so for those reasons, we ask the public to steer clear of those reaches for now. But after the removal is complete and as the restoration is ongoing, another part of this project is the construction of 5 new recreation sites. So already put the boat ramp in down at the Iron Gate reservoir down below there. And like I said, totally encourage you to put in down there. There'll be more recreation facilities built out there, bathrooms, nicer parking areas, picnic tables, etc. And then up in the Copco Reach, there's going to be a new access point above the Wards Canyon Reach, and then down below that canyon reach as well. And that's because if you look, like when I showed that drained reservoir image, right, the river is very slow and meandering out through the Copco Reservoir, perfect for like an inner tube float on a sunny summer day, right? But then down through the canyon, it's pretty rocky and bumpy, a lot of class 4 rapids. And so the idea of the placement of those 2 recreation sites is that you could put in, up in the Copco community and float your inner tube down and then hop out at that recreation site before the rough and rowdy canyon. But if you're a kayaker or a boater that's looking for that experience, you could put in there and then get out at the bottom of the canyon. So those are some of the recreation opportunities that are to come.
Thank you, Rand. Maybe you can, excuse me, elaborate a little bit on the tours that you give and maybe the overwhelming number of tours and media outreach that you receive, because there is a question asking about the best time to visit the location. And for those tribal people or river community folks who haven't had the opportunity to go on a tour, this may be a good time for you to share, Ren, what the upcoming schedule looks like.
Yeah, so I have done a lot of tours out of the site. It's probably close to 200 at this point. And I love taking people out there because, as you guys saw in my slideshow, is like, this is a really big project. And I'm sure that everybody here is a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of information that is being thrown at you this evening. And when you're out there seeing it in person, it just makes a lot more sense. And so I've done all these tours. We are nearing the end. And so I only got would be happy to put together a community tour though, if folks are interested. So what I do ask is that you have a group of people. After some discussions with Mark Poppy, we agreed that we are going to start limiting the tours either to folks who worked on dam removal, right? They're a signatory to the KHSA, they're a part of this project and need to come see it in person, or for folks who live on the Klamath River itself, right? Because Klamath Basin communities definitely deserve to know what's going on in their backyard. So those are kind of the tours that I'm going to be offering from this point out. But so if you're interested in putting one together for your community or your Klamath-based organization, you can email me at ren@klamathrenewal.org. And if, unfortunately, I'm booked on the date that you wanted to go out, the road around the Copco and Iron Gate reservoirs remains open. So you are always free to go and drive that road, see how the restoration is going, see how things are looking. And dam removal is going to be over before you know it. Like I was saying, we are on track to have those coffer dams breached and have a free-flowing condition by the end of August, beginning of September, then removing that associated infrastructure, and then crews are going to demobilize. And so it'll be a lot easier to get out there and see the places where these dams once stood.
Thank you, Ren. And there's probably about 6 more questions in the forum. Regina? I can go ahead and ask another one. Let's see, will hatchery steelhead be produced at the new hatchery or only salmon? I think we covered some of that.
I think the short answer to that is no. The hatchery is only producing Chinook salmon and salmon at this point.
Thank you. Regina?
Okay, how about we just do maybe 1 or 2 more questions since we are at time? One of the questions is, has there been any surveillance on aquatic insect recruitment and survival both above and below Iron Gate? And if so, when will this be reported or?
Yeah, I can report that the Karuk tribe is working with Cal Poly Humboldt and UC Davis on a food web study. We're in our 3rd year, so we're going to continue this study beyond this year, but we will. I don't have any results to really report right now, but just letting you know that this food web study is happening and we are looking at aquatic insects.
I will say we also are working, I think we're working on that one too, Taz, but we're doing another one with Oregon State University about outcomes of dam removal in terms of what things are important to people that are using the river. So we're doing things about primary productivity, aquatic inverts, food webs, and things like that throughout the river. That's working with Desiree Tullis and at Oregon State University. So it's similar but different. It's focusing on cultural and other uses of the Klamath River and how they're affected by certain of the parameters that are affected by dam removal, like turbidity or algae growth or food productivity or fish numbers, things like that, how they affect people's use of the river.
Thank you. And I think we'll have the last questions for Taz and Mike, and we'll end with elaborating a little on what's next as far as the restoration component of the Klamath River.
I can go first, Mike, since I finished last time. But I'll just say that the restoration of salmon and having a free flowing river is vitally important to the Karuk tribe. And I would like to mention that we are probably most interested in, as far as salmon, reintroduction of spring Chinook salmon into the upper basin. Spring Chinook were once the most abundant run of salmon, and arguably the most important salmon to the tribes. And Karuk tribe, has ceremonies that were lost, fisheries that were lost. So restoring these important salmon will also, bring back fisheries like the trigger net fisheries that once happened down below Ike's Falls, and the first salmon ceremony. And it's really following traditional ecological knowledge, which is let the head of the run get to the headwaters. I mean, that's just it in a nutshell. So, with that, along with all the other benefits of dam removal, we're really looking forward to the future, and thank you.
Mike?
So I think where I see things going is that, like I said, when I first was talking, we're starting to integrate the upper and lower basin. We're starting to integrate traditional environmental knowledge and Western science. And we're also starting to integrate uplands, fire management, fish management, and everything all coming together. And we're not in for an easy time here. Climate change is just kicking our butts right now. And we're gonna have to fight hard to stay even here, let alone gain ground. But it is exciting to see there is funding. There are tribes taking leadership. What's most inspiring to me is the young tribal members coming in to take positions of leadership in the fisheries department, designing restoration projects, and doing things that affect their own future. That's what I see happening right here is an integration, and hopefully we can just hold it together and increase the security of salmon in the future. That's what I see, and that's what excites me the most.
Thank you, Mike. As you all know, this project is monumental as it is the world's largest dam removal project, encompassing the states of Oregon and California. And the fact that these dams have had severe negative impacts on at least 11 Native American tribes. There's been hundreds, if not thousands of people who are responsible for the success of bringing these dams down. So I would just like to close by saying how proud I am of everyone for never giving up. And as our elders say, the fish are resilient and the people have proven we are resilient because we are still here just as the salmon. And that's why we call each other family. Tonight's event was hosted by Save California Salmon, the Yurok and Karuk Tribe. We are working diligently right now to organize a dam removal celebration on October 5th. So put that in your calendar. The current location will be in Yreka, California. There will be more details to follow soon. So I would just like to say thank you to everyone for attending the Klamath Dam removal update. Have a good evening.
Go.